sure where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do or how I wanted to sound. So bear with me. I'll probably lose track a few times, stumble, but you know, just even going through this past year with my dad and everything that we had to go through and try to get through, and you know, it's not one way that you want to spend that type of year with someone in their last days and their last time. So just like I said, bear with me. But you know, and Deanne knows, and my brother couldn't be here today. He's watching on video, I hope. So I just want to say, I mean, our dad was withdrawn and quiet a lot of times. You know, I figured it was just a Nemeth trait. He seemed to think a lot, or he was focused on other places and times and things like that. I think Ian could probably say the same thing about me. He could also be pretty intense. I'm pretty sure Ian can say the same thing. It took me all these years to kind of realize what was going on as we were growing up. You felt kind of like he wasn't quite there, but he always was. You know, as I look back now, he was always there. Just kind of sitting in the background, letting things happen, but also guiding them just slightly with his hands. And I would think that in his faith, that's how he sees God, just there. You know, not an overwhelming presence. He did write a book, and I'm glad all of those got handed out or they went somewhere, so I hope you guys everybody appreciates that. But you know, with him being withdrawn and stuff, you know, I used to think it was his plane crash, but there was also other personal incidents that happened in his life that kind of kept him a little bit guarded at times, even though he was a pastor and a counselor. I think he liked to look at other people's lives sooner than he liked to look at his own, and that was his own, you know, kind of his relief. And even though he did have a great faith and stuff like that, God didn't take all his pain away. He still lived with a lot of it, and went through it every day and what he was doing. As we grew up too, I think one thing he wanted to do, he wanted to give us a spiritual life. He also wanted us to realize the goods on this planet and this earth and people and friends and socially. And I think socially he really wanted that for us, even though he was a little bit withdrawn. I know a lot of you here probably had a pretty good relationship with him, but you could also know that he was a little reserved at times. He would come out a lot. When we were growing up, he moved us away from the first house that I knew on Crestwood, and that was kind of South Scottsdale, not too far south. But he went to Central Scottsdale up in McCormick Ranch. And I tell you what, it's only a few miles away, but it's worlds apart. If you guys know Scottsdale, it is worlds apart. So, and it meant a lot to him to do that, to think that he was moving us into a middle class or an upper middle class area, even though he really couldn't afford it. He wanted to make sure that he had everything for us and that we could find a good life. You know, like I said, not only just spiritually, but you know, of this world or physically as well. He did a thing called Abundant Living Seminars when I was growing up, and he used to travel a lot. He used to take us on trips. We've been to Canada and mostly the upper Northwest and things like that. And he'd go to Alaska, and he'd bring us back these weird Inuit toys, which were made out like animal stuff, which was kind of interesting then, but today, not as great of a feeling when I see those things. And I have them at the house, so. But then when he was home, I mean, we had a nice house. He gave us a pool and all the stuff that we had in McCormick Ranch. I mean, I remember we'd sit on the roof, me and my friends, and he'd be somewhere doing something, and we would get 6 rolls of kite string and tie a kite together, and we'd let it go until you couldn't see the thing anymore. You just saw a piece of string going up. My brother would do half gainers into the pool off of the roof. My sister used to invite all her friends over, and they used to swim and pick on me. She knows that. That's true. Some of her friends are here too, so appreciate that. He would drive us around. We had an old station wagon, and this is crazy to think about now, but he would roll down the back window and we'd sit on the back of the station wagon as he cruised down the street, their arms up above. I can't even imagine anybody doing that today. So, you know, it was fun. We had golf courses, go buy golf balls. So these are all things that I did as a kid that he afforded me to do. But I never really put two and two together about what he was doing and why he was doing it. And it seemed like he wasn't there a lot, but he really was. He was just making things happen. And I really appreciate that. About his faith as well. You know, he had a strong faith. Everybody knows that here. And he was deeply committed. So as a kid growing up, I remember in 8th grade, I wanted to go see Ozzy Osbourne, Mark the Moon Tour. Oops. The Mark at the Moon Tour. And he said, all right, let me listen to the tape. So I went and got the tape, and I gave him my oversized Walkman, generic Walkman. I put it in, and you know what? I'd been through backward masking a couple classes and things like that, so I knew what was coming. I knew it was going to be a hard no. But he listened to it. He listened to the first side, the tape stopped. He took off the headphones. He looked at me. He opened the tape deck, flipped it over, and listened to the other side. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? Is he actually going to do this? But there was still that fear that he was going to say no. He got done, he looked at me, he shook his head, and he said, okay, you can go. If anybody knows me, music means a lot to me. And I appreciate that he afforded me that. He didn't try to put his beliefs on me, and he didn't try to force anything. And I think that's one thing that he did, is that he thought things would come their way. He always felt that God would take care of stuff and it would happen. He didn't need to force it. He didn't need to be overbearing. He didn't need to do a lot of things to make things happen. And people are going to take their own way. They have their choices and they have their right to make those choices. And I think he strongly believed in that, which I think made him a stronger person and a man. Just kind of losing thought here now, thinking about him and everything that he did. I'm trying not to ramble, but I'm a little bit stuck right now. Between all of us, my sister had a completely different experience with my dad and my mother than I did. My brother had a completely different experience than I did. It's interesting to look back and think about the way all of our lives turned out and what's happening and how much he meant to us. But I think all the same, he meant the world to us. And when my mother died, Paula, that was just, I think, the biggest hurt that he'd ever seen, ever felt. I know that. And I think about it when people say, God, then family. I have a hard time even thinking that he would pick God over my mom. And I know that might be bad to say for most people to hear, but he loved her dearly. You can see those pictures. And he was a changed man once she passed away. I guess I'm just, I'll finish up here. And just as when he was spending his last 8 months and we were going through everything he was going on, and I would have to go get tested, and I'd quarantine, and then I'd go see him and do video phone chats with him and stuff like that. And as he started to fade with dementia, but there was always a thing. He would see me walk into the room and he'd recognize me right away. When they would hold the camera, the phone to him, he would recognize me. He recognized all of you guys too. Whenever you do it, it was interesting, and it was such a sweet smile, and he was so happy to see us. And he'd always say, oh, glad to see you, and thank you for doing this. I told him, my granddaughter Ellie, every time, he'd go, oh, it's Ellie. Hold up one of our dogs, Dobby, you could recognize him. He liked to look at the fish tank too, so we would sit there with the camera on the fish tank. So he enjoyed that. One thing is, when all this was happening, it reminded me a lot of my mom, that it was happening and we knew it was happening, but but we didn't really recognize it. I mean, you think back years of things where he was fading and issues were happening, but this past year, I mean, you have an idea that it's coming near the end, but at the same time, you still refuse to recognize it. I think that makes it really tough. And to be honest with you, here is through all my years, we were never very affectionate people, never very huggy, anything like that. And when he was, the last times I saw him and he came out in his wheelchair, we were sitting there and we were talking and he smiled and he said, "Thank you for being here." I reached out and I grabbed his hand and he grabbed it back and he didn't let it go. Just looking back now, like I said, with my dad and the way he was, and with my mom, one thing that I realized is that, as a family, when we're there, and this goes with the grandkids and everybody else too, and the great-grandkids and stuff like that, but specifically when my mom and dad were both around, was that my dad quietly set the table, and my mom called everybody to dinner. And that's just the way they were. I think that was a good thing. So I'd like to try to read a poem here really quick. And this one's, I'm going to tell you, it's a heartbreaker for me, so it's going to be hard to get through. Right? And as much as I would like some of this to be uplifting, this is going to be a little bit of a thing between me and my dad. So it's called Yesterday. All right. My friend says I was not a good son. You understand? I say, yes, I understand. He says I did not go to see my parents very often, and I say, yes, I know. Even when I was living in the same city, he says, maybe I would go there once a month, or maybe even less. I say, oh yes. He says the last time I went to see my father. I say the last time I saw my father. He says the last time I saw my father, he was asking me about my life, how I was making out. He went to the next room to get something to give me. Oh, I say, feeling again the cold of my father's hand the last time. He says, and my father turned to the doorway. He saw me look at my wristwatch, and he said, I would like you to stay and talk with me. I say, oh, yes. But if you're busy, he said, I don't want you to feel you have to just because I'm here. I say nothing. He says, my father. He said, maybe. You have important work you're doing, or maybe you should be seeing someone. I don't want to keep you. I look out the window. My friend is older than I am. He says, I told my father it was so, and I got up and left him, though there was nowhere I had to go. And nothing I had to do. So, just in closing, I keep everybody close to you. We let everybody slip away too much because we always think there's going to be a tomorrow. I hope that's not too preachy or anything like that. But, I love you, Dad. And I'm glad he's going to go be with Mom. I'm very happy about that. So, thank you for putting up with that.